223 days. That's how long it's been since home prices in the United States reversed and began to spiral downwards. Since that date, we've had dozens of experts claim that the housing market is headed into a massive crash, one that seems to be rivaling 2008. And this reality was mostly true. Look at any metric comparing the two initial downturns and you'll see striking similarities. For example, in the '08 crash, the Case-Shiller Index, arguably the most reliable metric we use in terms of tracking values, took nearly 7 months or 7 readings to fall just a tiny 1%. This time around, we achieved this in less than 2 months, with the Case-Shiller falling at a pace we have never seen before, much worse than what we witnessed back in 2006. This alarming trend triggered many around the country to panic in regards to housing. The evidence was clear. Values were plummeting with interest rates rapidly rising. This caused a near perfect storm of conditions. Affordability dropped to all-time lows. Following nearly 3 years of wild speculative growth driven by the post-pandemic boom, everything that could go wrong with the market did. Prices simply seemed out of control. Interest rates went from 3 to 6% in a matter of months, and in many markets, multiple offers per house was still a reality most buyers were facing. The housing market got so bad that the infamous University of Michigan Buying Condition Survey, a reliable measurement of affordability and how Americans feel about the market, fell to all-time lows. To put that into perspective, this is a statistic that's been tracked since the early 1960s with over 62 years of reliable data. And not one time throughout history did the public feel this negative about buying a house, not even in the 1980s when interest rates were as high as 18% and a double-dip recession pushed unemployment past 10%. Simply put, we are living through one of the worst markets ever for buyers. However, these are all things that have been understood for a while now. Nobody's surprised that the Case-Shiller is plummeting or that buyers are incredibly upset at the state of this market. These are all facts that you probably already knew if you watched my previous videos or read the work of any real estate expert on the internet. So why watch the rest of this video given that we already knew these facts? Well, I've spent the past month digging through the Redfin, Realtor.com, and Zillow data to come up with a theory, one that will shock most listeners and provide a different outlook on the state of the market going forward. And it's not just an idea in my head, it's something that's backed by reliable data using the world's most sophisticated data sets. You see, when people across the internet and financial media talk about housing, they're typically referencing numbers that are published by various public and private outlets that attempt to capture what is happening on the ground. And right now, the narrative is simple. Prices are plummeting on a national level, but dig a little deeper and you'll find some surprises. Now, before we head down this path, we first need to understand a simple concept, the flaw of the average and the median. Both of these measurements are subject to the simple statistical fallacy of false impression. Due to the nature of real estate markets and how they behave on a city-by-city basis, you can get vastly different outcomes from one zip code to the next. This is very apparent in today's crash. I've already made a video about the east-west divide, which you can find in the description below, but essentially in today's market, cities like Seattle are suffering crashes on par with 2008 levels, while many East Coast cities are barely budging, falling less than 2% during the same time period. So while yes, the market has fallen over the past 6 months, it hasn't been felt in most cities outside of the big boom towns in the West, specifically Vegas, Phoenix, San Francisco, and Seattle. In fact, I went through fresh data from the Fed's website and essentially created something called the boomtown index, which is a measurement that tracks Case-Shiller prices going back to February of 2020 in exactly those 4 cities. And what we see is the story of the past 3 years summarized in a simple chart. Now, before I reveal this chart that explains this crazy 2023 real estate story, please take a moment to hit that like and subscribe button if you've enjoyed the content thus far. I took a month-long break from YouTube to sort of gather myself and improve the channel, and I would greatly appreciate it if we could have an explosive start to these new uploads, which are going to be packed with new data from a wide array of news sources. So please do me a bit of a favor and hit that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying the new content. Now back to the chart. Indexed at February 2020 prices, everything becomes clear. Boomtown prices went up 55% in less than 3 years following the events of 2020. If we break that off by city, we can see that in Phoenix, as an example, this was even worse, with prices jumping 70%. And remember, this is a 70% increase on top of interest rates jumping up at record-breaking pace. The market in many of these cities was a different world just 3 years ago, and for new buyers in these boomtowns, it's easy to see why they have simply given up on the American dream. How can you possibly buy a home knowing that your neighbors paid nearly 2 times less just 24 months ago? Adjusted for the interest rate changes, the payment differences are even more dramatic and wild. For example, a house that was bought in January of 2020 for $300,000 would have a payment of around $1,300. Now that same house nearly 3 years later would cost $510,000 and with a 6% mortgage would require a monthly payment of $2,700, nearly 3 times more than what was typical just before the events of 2020. But there is good news. The boomtown index is rapidly changing. You can see it's plummeting down for the last few months, and the gains we saw over the past 3 years are now slipping away. This chart shows the dramatic development unfolding with 11% of the past gains erased away. From here, we need another 27% decrease to match the values we saw right before February of 2020. Which at this pace would take around 14 more months to achieve. That should be great news for buyers, and given how long the past crash took, it's a pace that we've never before seen in the history of modern markets. But there is a massive asterisk that isn't discussed anywhere else that I could find. You see, these numbers that I used to create this new index were taken from the Case-Shiller releases, which are typically put out on the last Tuesday of each month, but because of the methodology used to collect this data, it's very delayed. The latest release is for numbers going back to December of 2022, and the Case-Shiller uses data that's averaged from 3 months before that. So essentially what we're seeing in this index isn't actually what's happening on the ground right now. It's a delayed look into what's already occurred. Now this is great for establishing a trend, but it has a massive flaw in that it doesn't explain the rapidly changing conditions occurring as we speak. So to investigate this, I began researching different data sets that could provide a better look into these markets for 2023, and in this process I discovered something slightly disturbing. You see, Redfin actually publishes a wide array of data for public consumption, and this data is typically less delayed and more detailed than these Case-Shiller numbers. So what I did was simple. I took listing prices for LA, Seattle, San Francisco, Vegas, and Phoenix going back to February of 2020 and investigated the trend to see 1, do they differ from the Case-Shiller numbers, and 2, how are things looking in recent months? And the discovery I made was quite shocking. For number 1, the trend is clear. Listing prices correlated with the data we saw from the Case-Shiller, proving that the Redfin numbers align with the numbers from the most trusted and reliable indicator in the world. Looking at the details, listing prices took a massive plummet downwards starting around May of 2022 and continued to fall until around January of 2023. Each of the cities was different, with Vegas as the worst and LA as the most stable. Ultimately averaged together, the West Coast listing prices look something like this, which matches what we saw earlier, a giant move to the upside in what appears to be a massive bubble, followed by a crash that started in the summer of 2022. But look further and we see something extremely disturbing. Since the start of the new year, listing prices have shot up and continue to go up. Following December, in every single one of these cities, the trend is clear. Listing prices are exploding up, reversing everything that's happened in the latter half of 2022, and nobody is talking about this. Everyone is ignoring this uncomfortable fact that is going against the crash narrative. It's so bad that in some cities like Seattle as an example, this reversal has come close to completely wiping away the improvements we thought we were seeing following the summer. Indexed to February 2020 prices, Seattle list prices peaked in May of 2022, reaching an index level of 137 before starting their plummet downwards to 123 in December of 2022. Since then, however, this crash has been reversed, with the index quickly rising to 131 as of March of this year, meaning that once again we are close to record high prices. Remember, the Case-Shiller is incredibly accurate but also incredibly delayed. Listing numbers from Redfin are thought to be the bleeding edge because these numbers are coming from active listings on their website. Other metrics like median prices take as long as a month to appear on county records, which are only then ingested by these prop techs and other data collection agencies, which naturally make them unreliable in detecting what's happening on the ground right now. On top of this, like I mentioned earlier, other indexes like the Case-Shiller take a 3-month average to develop numbers, meaning that not only are you battling the time delay between the sale record, you're also ingesting data that happened 90 days ago. In summary, the developments here are clear. West Coast prices, which tend to serve as an anchor for the rest of the markets, are headed up, not down since the start of the new year, and that may come as a shock to people who are strictly looking at charts that ingest sales data, not list price data. So yes, while the market has cooled off and began crashing in the summer of 2022, the start of 2023 is throwing a wrench in this downfall. How it turns out is a question that I'll look to answer in my next few videos. Thank you guys for watching. As always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments below what you're seeing in your local market, especially if you live in one of those 5 cities I referenced in my charts.